Hello, good
Estamos,
morning, everyone.
hola, ¿qué tal? Muy buenos días.
Good
Estamos
morning,
de
everyone.
nueva
What a
cuenta
pleasure
en el
having you
cuarto
here.
Congreso de Construcción de Paz con
This is
Perspectiva
the
de Género.
fourth
Estamos en el
conference on peace
Conversatorio
building from a
Educación,
gender
Familia y
perspective.
Paz,
This
que ha
is
sido
the Conversatory on
organizado
Education, Family, and
por
Peace.
la
And we're
Cátedra
so
UNESCO de
happy to see all of you, to have you here in our session today. Yes.
Para la Paz,
And
Universidad Técnica Particular.
Creo que ya no se oye nada. Sí, yo tampoco escucho, ¿eh?
testing, testing, testing.
Creo que se le congeló el internet a Elvia. Elvia, dejamos de escucharte.
Nada, ¿ahí me escuchan?
Sí.
Ok. Bueno, estamos en el
We are
Conversatorio
in
Educación,
this
Familias y
Conversatory
Paz,
Education, Families, and
dentro del cuarto
Peace,
Congreso
in this
de
fourth conference on peace
Construcción de
building
Paz
from a
con
gender
Perspectiva de
perspective,
Género, que ha sido organizado por la Cátedra UNESCO
organized
de Cultura y
by the
Educación para la Paz,
UNESCO
Universidad. Para darles la
Program for
bienvenida,
Peace and
contamos
Universities.
con la
We
presencia
have the
de la maestra
presence
Araceli
of
Telles, quien es directora
Araceli
general de
Telles. She is the
formaciones
Director General
ancianas
of
en
Incidents
la
and Gender
Universidad
Perspective.
Iberoamericana Ciudad de México. Muchas gracias, Sara, por
Thank you so much
acompañarnos.
for being with us.
¿Qué tal? Buenos días.
Hello, good morning, everyone.
Nos acompañan por el
Thank you for being with us.
También a todas
And the Gender and Inclusion channel. I want to thank everyone for participating in this panel. I want to say something just to remind you this is an effort for a fourth consecutive year in which what we are trying to do is try to generate proposals, alternatives that have to do with peace construction. In this sense, for the Iberoamericana University, it is a great pleasure. We're so happy to see how many organizations, universities, and people are part of this initiative. This is the year in which we have more panels and more participation. I think this has been a really good thing, organizing this meeting, organizing it, and coordinated by Elvia to look into the possibility we now have through virtual means. Instead of seeing it like a tragedy, we have the possibility of sharing with people from different parts of the world, their experiences, their wisdom, their knowledge, and their expertise. I am so happy this is the case. Today, particularly, as already said by Dr. González de Pliego, and this panel is organized by the UNESCO Culture and Education for Peace program, the Technical University in Ecuador. We thank you so much, the University of Loja in Ecuador. We know that organizing this type of event means a lot of work and agreements beforehand. We thank you so much. The University in Ecuador, thank you for organizing and being part of this effort. In peace building, we believe there are no efforts that are isolated. We can each participate to nurture this puzzle and to try to fix this broken world, to try to rebuild and have a better world in which everyone and all the worlds are possible, as the Zapatista movement says here in Chiapas in Mexico. Welcome, everyone. Please feel free. This is your home, even though you are at a distance from us. So that's all on my part. And thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for these words to this panel. And we hope we can have her in a few moments. Yes, please. And let me tell you about Dr. Francisco Jimenez Bautista. He is the International Advisor, UNESCO Chair of Culture and Education for Peace, and he also teaches at the Granada University in Spain. He's been studying peace and conflicts and ecological anthropology, cultural issues, migrations, and racism. And the people in the metropolitan area of Granada as well. Relations, Perceptions, and Conflicts 2004. Let's talk about peace. These are some of the publications he has written, and he has been working on this for a long time, and he has many publications. Thank you so much, Doctor, for being with us. Please.
Muy buenas tardes.
Good
Gracias
afternoon.
por tus palabras tan atentas,
Thank you for your
Jorge.
words, for your
Y
kind
vamos a
words,
intentar
Jorge.
dar
I will
cabida
try
al panel
to
número 6 de Educación, Familias y Paz.
talk about
Primero
education,
agradecer la
families, and
deferencia
peace.
de
I
la
want to
directora
thank you
general,
for
Araceli
inviting
Telles,
me.
y
I
especialmente
want
por
to
la
thank
coordinadora del
Graciela
panel, Elvia
Telles, and
González,
the
por la
coordinator of
invitación tan
this
atenta. Este panel
panel.
se plantea
Elvia, thank you
desde
so much.
la Cátedra UNESCO de Cultura y
This is
Educación para
from
la
the
Paz de la
UNESCO
UTPL, la
Chair
Universidad Técnica
of
Particular de
Culture and
Loja, donde
Education for
venimos
Peace,
trabajando
and also the
desde hace
University
algunos
of
años sobre
Loja
esta
in
temática,
Ecuador. We've been
y este
working on
año
these
pues
issues for
tenemos
years. And
o
this
hemos
year,
desarrollado un
we
proyecto de
can
educación y
develop
familia que nos
a
parece más.
project on education
Para
and
ir
family.
directamente al grano,
To go
vamos a
directly to
empezar
our
con
subject
4
matter,
panelistas.
let me
Uno
start
está en
out with
Ecuador,
4
otro en Madrid,
panelists. One
una
is
en Puerto
Ecuador,
Rico
the
y
other one in
otra
Madrid, the other
en
one in Puerto
Granada,
Rico,
realmente.
and
Vamos
the
a ver
other
que si
one in
somos capaces.
Granada.
Le vamos a
Let's see what
dar
happens.
primero la palabra a la doctora
First,
María
let me
Elvira
give the
Aguirre
floor to
Corneo.
Maria
Nos va a
Elvira
plantear el
Aguirre,
tema la
who will
familia,
be talking
espacio para
about
construir
family
ambientes
space
de paz.
to build
La doctora
environments of peace.
María Elvira
And
Aguirre
Dr.
es
Maria
doctora en
Elvira
orientación para
Aguirre,
la carrera
and
magíster en
she
desarrollo
is
e
a private
inteligencia y
technical
educación
University
y
of
licenciada en
Loja
educación
professor.
para Uruguay.
This is
Actualmente
in
es docente
Ecuador, but
en
right
la
now,
Universidad Técnica Particular de Loja,
as we've
en la
said,
área de
she's in
psicología
Ecuador
y
and she's in
educación,
psychology, but she's
además de
also worked
coordinadora
in
del grupo de
universities in
investigación en
Paraguay.
orientaciones educativas.
So she is
Docente, también asociada
teaching
a la Cátedra
and
UNESCO de Cultura
covers
y
many
Educación para la Paz. Tiene la
education
palabra la
issues.
doctora
We
María
give
Elvira
her the
Aguirre.
floor, please. Hello, good morning. Very kind of you. Thank you, everyone, for this space, for our university to be able to support this type of conversatories. And this has to do with our experiences, not only theoretical, but also practical things. And I want to thank Mr. Jimenez Bautista. He's a close collaborator of our university, especially of the UNESCO Chair of Culture and Education for Peace. Thank you for being with us. And I want to share these ideas with you on the objective of this conversatory within this framework of peace building Congress. So I want to talk about the family as a space to build environments of peace. And we've been developing this work in different projects in terms of contexts that are urban, marginalized contexts of our cities, directly with children and families, especially, and youth. And also groups that are working on peace culture and the culture of peace as well, and with schooling segments of the population and segments with no schooling. The family, this is a very broad topic from the theoretical viewpoint, from the different areas, psychology, education, sociology, anthropology. There are many family definitions, and our context is characterized by families in Ecuador. They have different conformations, not just nuclear families living under the same roof, but we talk about extended families in which, under this umbrella, that would be the same roof, we have many generations, cousins, nieces, nephews, grandparents under the same roof. So in the same family group, we even have 3 generations. The conformation of families has been affected by social phenomena and things that are happening socially, like migration. For those who know our country, Ecuador has had major migration movements, the result of social economic situations that have made it mandatory for the family members to leave our country. And in the year 2000, at the beginning of this year, of 2000, people migrated to Spain and Italy. The Ecuadorian population in Spain is very big. Over 1 million people from Ecuador living now in Spain. Nonetheless, these are data we cannot confirm because there are many migrants who haven't legalized their situation. This means that family disintegration has various problems for those that are still in our country, but those who have left as well. There's another phenomenon. For some theoreticians, this is well known. Transnational families, that is, part of the family lives in Ecuador and the other part is outside the country, in Spain, in Italy, and the countries with the highest mobility rate in terms of people leaving Ecuador, Spain first, the US, then Italy, and then the UK. The Ecuadorian government, the previous administration, launched an important process of repatriation so as to get families together again. Many families are now reorganized because of that process. Nonetheless, we also see that, in fact, this family regrouping process has constituted misadjustments in terms of internal infrastructure and dynamic, because a lot of those families, especially parents who left a decade ago, now are recognizing their children that were very young when they left. Now they find adults when they come back. This is part of the social fabric in my country. We also have elements strengthening the family structure, but in other cases we see situations, and we have seen those situations affected by public knowledge. You are closer to the psychology part of all this, and you will know that the family system as such is comprised of different members of the family, regardless of the family characteristics. But this is like a thread, a central point, and we have the parents, the mother, the father, the children, the siblings, but we can also talk about extended families in which we have more family members. The family system as such, nuclear or extended or transnational, it is mediated by outside factors according to the place where the families are, according to the ecosystem that is, it is part of other microsystems that also tell us about this dynamic of each one of the members of the family. The context is different. We cannot talk about rural families and urban families and say they are one and the same thing. This is not the case. They each have special characteristics. That's why when we analyze this context, which is the micro context, we have to remember this is also part of other important elements fundamental for the evolutional development, not only physical, emotional development, but also psychological development. In this context, we talk about peace because one of the basic lines that UNESCO has been promoting for years now, for those who have peace studies, you know well that there was a big presence through these ideas and how they were generated as of the First World War. And there are concepts like negative and positive peace. All those concepts have been proposed through very important theoretical lines, and they are guiding this discussion so that researchers in sociology, education, and human rights may expand this discussion and analysis and take those concepts through a social construct. But the idea is for people themselves to be part of this great movement that we call peace culture. This is a social movement. It should be built, valued, and it should be increasingly supported by different instances, not only social and political, but also education instances, and from the essence of society itself, the family. We all live in the midst of a world pandemic. Therefore, there are real life cases. These are some elements related to data in our country, in Ecuador. Family violence data during the quarantine, cases of families requesting support since the family environment, which was supposed to be a safe and secure environment, it is not the case. So people cannot develop in that environment under the pandemic. They are going through a lot of claims of family violence. Not all those claims are publicly known, but those members, especially the most vulnerable children and women, have been victims of violence during the quarantine of COVID-19. What do we have to do in these circumstances, which is our responsibility, those of us that want to support people in the peace culture process? Well, this is something that's part of the family structure. We know there are so many relations in the family. You see this, you cannot perhaps see it so well, but you can see that among the family members, the parents, the children, the grandparents, even relations they have may generate family conflicts that do not imply we're crossing the very thin line and that there's family violence as such. However, conflicts take place in a normal dynamic. What is the situation in this case of those that are right with the family structure that may give tools for families to have more judgmental elements to support in this type of family conflict? Let us remember that conflicts cannot be classified as good or bad. And there might be conflict situations helping to generate new behaviors, new dynamics that will help in the development of the family itself. But when those conflicts become and they go behind this limit in respecting other family members, and we have power relations, the father with the children, the father with the wife, who is really in control of the family. Whenever we have these power relations, this type of conflict may go on to the higher next level. So we cannot ignore the fact that families are strongly linked to education processes. Par excellence, we parents have always been the mediators and responsible for the learnings of our children. This has been it has been seen clearly in these moments of confinement, in which a high percentage of parents are now involved in the formal education process of their children, and not only being the mediators of activities of our everyday lives. And the parents or the family as such, they are responsible for emotional security, saying that members found in this space, whether they are confined or not, well, they are responsible for developing behaviors for emotional security and safety, for self-esteem, generation of beliefs and values among the family members. Some of the parents had left that responsibility for the school. That is the responsibility of generating those elements. But now in a lot of the countries, and here in Ecuador, we have the education system online. So parents are making double efforts on this. So this is no magic recipe for this. Each family, each dynamic will be generating its own guidelines and practices for their children. From generation to generation. They may each take previous models of how they were brought up by their parents and what they learned from them. So this type of patterns and standards, certainly, if they are not well structured, they could normalize certain behaviors, violence in the family, for instance. So these patterns we are now mentioning, in which the children, the family members are developing, and this is allowing family dynamics to be different. Each family, it learns from the previous decisions. So sometimes it is complicated to determine and say, we are going to do 1, 2, 3. That is to number various characteristics to say, well, a family is well structured or not. We, in our work, have done exercises with families in context of exclusion, and the context is very important. In a small city like ours, we're talking about 300,000 inhabitants in our city. We see urban context and marginalized urban context, and there's difference between both of them, because educational opportunities, economic opportunities of those families have to do with a different type of needs, different from one and the other. So we're working with those groups in a very basic fashion. What we know in the pyramid of working with basic notions or fundamentals that will allow for families to look into new concepts for their lives. But in those families, the members have not met their basic health, education, and food needs. So working with excluded families has been an interesting challenge. It's a challenge because whenever we work with them, we are very surprised. People may be a little bit afraid that people from outside their context arrive in their lives, and they think we're giving them the magic recipe. This is not the case. Especially our work with children means that those elements of peace culture, work, and everyday life activities, things like respect, values, culture itself, the family structure, and knowing that's their context and accepting that context, not as a space saying, I will never leave my context, this is my life forever. No, it means they're accepting this in a positive manner with the purpose of contributing so that those elements that could be elements of exclusion may become potentials for them. So here, let me tell you that we parents have an influence, strong influence. We are the fundamental pillar in the education and development of our children. We have different dimensions, the physical one, emotional, psychological dimensions. And right in this type of education and development of dimensions, this is something we will see later in the development of the different environments in which our children live and the relationship among siblings, parents and children, and the relationship between the grandparents and the grandchildren, that is. So we're going through a very special moment in the world we live in right now because of the pandemic, but we are social beings. Therefore, those characteristics acquired in the family structure will each one of us replicate those characteristics in school context, social and community contexts. Therefore, it is fundamental on how these elements may be strengthened at home because we will each be replicating those behaviors outside the home. What to do in this situation? I have no magical recipe, but it's important to give you an idea to help those that are interested in working in key elements, as for instance, the family context. I think we now have to work and reinforce personal self-esteem and also family self-esteem. There are families going through very difficult moments. We know, for instance, that in social economic events people are going through, well, this is a very serious situation. There are families whose representatives, the father or the mother, are unemployed, and this is generating a very high stress level, and therefore reinforcing elements that make us be a family, that make us live in harmony. This is something we should be working on reinforcing. At the same time, we should be increasing, discovering assertive communication strategies. We believe that living in harmonious spaces in the same home, well, their communication has to be present. Assertive communication, because many of the children talk to their parents, but the parents sometimes are concerned about something else or their own situation because there's such a high percentage of adults in the families who are also having to do telework because of the pandemic. We have to remember this contextual social elements in the world because of the pandemic have generated many emotions that we should control, emotions we didn't even know our children were feeling or having: rage, anger, and frustration, for instance. So this emotional control, more than controlling it, we have to channel this appropriately for us to have these relationships of cordiality, an environment of tranquility and peace for everyone in the family to understand this is the case and this is quite necessary. That's why the WHO is saying that joint activities should be everyone's task. Those joint family activities, entertainment, fun activities in open spaces, sports, for instance, if there are possibilities, a space within the house itself, this should be done according to the WHO, because that way a lot of the emotions are manifested and you can play games, you can learn to win, you can learn to lose, but this has to do with the family development, and the family members may then have a space in which they can develop these elements, those emotions, but for this to be channeled according to the frustrations, fears, to outside or inside or internal circumstances. Then reassigning household roles. That's a key activity for all the family members to feel they are involved and that they are part of the development of their own families without leaving the responsibility just to one or two family members. Remember that there are situations of violence when the power structure is not working, or when the economy is not working in the family. And people in the family should understand their support is of the utmost importance. So as not to generate new violence, and joint actions, joint decision making is also very important. This is not only for adults, there are small decisions that children can also participate in. And this decision making has to be done by all the family members to generate exactly what I'm saying. Those environments in which there is no parental authoritarian style. The father saying, we do things my way and you have nothing to say about it. We have to establish more democratic ways so that boys, girls, and adolescents are part of the family decision making with a certain logic and a level of authority, yes, but this is shared authority. So I hope these brief reflections are of your interest. If you require any type of contact with our university, you can please write me and I will answer your questions. Thank you so much.
Muchas gracias
Thank you so much
por su
for your excellent presentation,
Vamos a presentar al
Maria
profesor
Elvira.
José
Now, Francisco José del Pozo Serrano of the Complutense University of Madrid, social pedagogic methods from gender equality perspective. Francisco del Pozo has a PhD, Science, Education Science, the University of Granada, is the founding president of the Colombian Association of Education and Social Pedagogic Methodologies. And he teaches and he has taught in Barranquilla, Colombia, at the university there. He teaches at the Complutense University of Madrid right now. He's done a lot of research on education for the university in Barranquilla, Colombia, and he has done a lot of research on social influence, human rights for the University of Madrid. And his last publications refer to social pedagogy and risk situations, conflicts, penitentiary education, education for peace, for children in social difficulties, and social justice. Francisco del Pozo, you have the floor. Can you hear me? I hope so. Thank you so much, everyone. I want to thank the organizers of this wonderful event, of the UNESCO Chair of Culture and Education for Peace and the Iberoamericana University in Mexico City. And I want to thank our colleagues who have been organizing this event, which is so important, so significant for us to continue working on peace construction, peace building, with a gender perspective in the family structure. Let me talk about family education. This is the education scenario and group, two divisions. One is related to family education as a parental practice in the intra-family everyday activities and relations that are produced throughout everyday activities in the process of the family relationship, and also family education as a practice of social educational intervention. They both generate construction, identity, and relationship with a family structure and the social structure as well. Although the first one does not have a planned intentionality, and generally it is aimed from the scientific. The second one does have more scientific basis to it. Yes, as our previous colleague just said, this education as an intra-family practice in everyday activities. This is has to do with joint activities through asymmetric structures, allowing information and acquiring information with emotional social experiences. This communication is mainly subjective or existential, and they have to do with cultural forms shared by one or all the members of the family. This behavior is educational because it creates values, practices, and notions. And in this existential relationship and life stories, we always have stress, tensions that are being generated, or differences even, as said by our previous colleague. Even though this is a conflict, they don't have to be resolved in a negative manner. They can be resolved in a positive manner. We know that through some studies of friends of different universities doing research on family development, we know that sometimes we have love and fear that generate conflicts, stress that can be addressed in a different manner. When there are influences or conditions of risk factors of protection that may support or reduce the possibility in a very peaceful manner for conflicts. Social educational intervention in the family structure is seen through social pedagogic methodologies. This is something which social educators participate actively, community educators, teachers, professors work with family groups. And there's intentionality in all this, and this is done through the participation of the family in the prevention also of all this for the family to act in internal or external situations that affect their own development processes, thus motivating, mobilizing personal environmental resources, and thus activating and enabling changes. In the organizations where I've worked, we do research of these issues, looking into available evidence for our research projects, even if it's critical, participatory research and aimed at actions at the Iberoamerican Association or also the Colombian Association. We are doing this type of work. So characteristics for family social education intervention, well, has different complex systemic and relational proposals. These are not only intervention proposals with isolated members of the family group, but from the macro systemic relations within the family structure, as mentioned by the previous speaker. And in those relations, we have risk protection factors to promote parental or family competition. This family competence or competition has been seen through the needs families have, protection factors. So which are the possibilities we have of boosting capacity of protection agents developed in the family itself. For that, we need participatory elements, especially for the entire family group. Family interventions for children, or usually they are in the hands of the parents in these different standards or patriarchal systems, working with the parents. And in this case, we understand the family group in a very broad sense, human diversity, pluralistic family elements, and this has to do with people and the external extended family structure that has so much to do with family relations. Therefore, family social pedagogic methods are empirical to say which is the most desirable result to implement for intervention. This intervention has to be through gender equity, so it should have emphasis on learning development through democratic relations where the decision making takes place in a well-balanced manner and the power relations can be also controlled and not be in the hands of a single member of the family, especially in the hands of the man because of his masculinity. And for us to be able to generate all this using a feminist approach and self-empowerment, possibilities to participate in the decision-making process and for women to be mobilized, and also for the participation of segments of the population that have been excluded, taking into account new masculinities for men. So, from this perspective, family education for peace should be developed taking into account the environment, especially the schools, the family, and communities. We should remember there's a school pedagogic perspective according to the different school levels that may develop education for peace using this gender equity perspective. But social pedagogic methods give way to other participations that take place in the classroom, informal spaces, and the spaces and relations of everyday activities in which the family develops its emotions and intersubjectivities, but also in the processes of intervention at the community level, at the school level, working with the families themselves. In this sense, as we have said, we want to work through evidence. There's a process of building peace in the Colombian Caribbean region since 2015. We've had a research project of education for peace with education sectors and vulnerable communities of the Colombian Caribbean region. And this has been done also with the Science and Technology Institute of Colombia. In the process of peace building after the peace agreements in Colombia, we founded this first research project developed after the peace agreements in that region. We found we were able to work with about 350 people, teachers, education communities, social community of age departments, or states of the Caribbean region in Colombia using multi-method methodologies to assess this process of peace building in Colombia, taking into account gender equity and through our support with the families. In this research project, we developed these four phases. One, diagnosis, to know the initial evaluation about the main needs they had, then a training process with the education community accompanying the territories, and then the evaluation. This is a cyclic type of process with social transfers in different publications, as for instance, the one you see on the screen. that has to do, of course, with education for peace from action, research, outlook in the Colombian Caribbean. And this is promoting today's event as well. Well, we found in this diagnosis phase, I cannot give you all data, but this has already been published. We found that communities understand structural violence is very strong. That structural violence is macrosystemic, it's institutional violence because of abandonment or social political violence, but especially abandonment on the part of the state. So in that violence of state abandonment, so manifested in those communities, we find other types of violence. That's why we're working and reflecting on those issues in this event. They have to do with perception of high family violence in Colombian Caribbean families, especially the unequal relation of gender equality as a social cultural practice and social cultural construction related to inequality of men and women because of sex related and gender related issues. And this cultural difference means there's a perception in which teachers say there are many dysfunctional families. Then we would have to understand what they understand by dysfunctional families, because sometimes when there are monoparental families, they associate that monoparental families are dysfunctional per se. This is something we were working on throughout this project in the communities. It's also interesting to see they feel abandonment and lack of relationship of the community of the school with the family, and this very low relationship level. There's also planning work that has to be done with the participation of teachers through social pedagogic methods for everyday family lives. This is what they are saying they need for an improvement to take place. This is related to possible violence also against LGBTQ population, students in those schools. And as of that point, we've developed a training process with all the principals and the educators in those institutions so that they would be multiplying skills and capabilities to see what was really necessary to work on as a priority to create institutional projects with coexistence manuals, education methods, and social participation, for that to be also part of the research and the professional educational process. So we looked at education, training, working on things that had a very high rating, for instance, family care, child development, gender diversity, working on harassment, hostilities because of gender issues, curricular programs, because we have to remember that Colombia projected specific standards for the UNESCO Chair of Culture and Education for Peace, where diversity and pluralistic issues had to be included. So we developed this. It had not been taken into account in the past in this part of Colombia. Now, in the process, we found that the family structure and the education community through social agents or the teaching agents, the families themselves, because this was a collective project. So the participatory methodology and the workshops were effective and highly satisfactory. This is their own evaluation, and we found interesting methodology to work through family protection factors that have to do with capabilities and skills approach done through workshops with the family, schools, and communities together in the school spaces, This has to do with assessing not their needs or risks, because it was very clear that teachers were saying these families are dysfunctional even before we found them in these workshops. Well, boys and girls started participating with their families and educators, and things started changing. And there was an awareness process that started because we found that we would have to assess important things, as for instance, my father, and this is something they had as the machismo, the male chauvinism representations in these Caribbean regions where there are so many natural cultural patterns related to male chauvinism. They said, well, my father works, he sells avocados out in the street because he's trying to give us a good life and he's trying to take care of us. I am his son or his daughter. So this is awareness on the possibility of finding new strategies we had designed, finding action prioritization processes. What are they? The schools, the family schools, they were not visible. They were not known in the communities. As of these workshops, we started those family schools, and we had community fairs in cities, for instance, where we found that families and education institutions had this type of orientation of the projects, and we developed the first significant activities. Here you see the website of the Northern University, social pedagogic methodologies, and education for peace. You see that this is the Universidad del Norte website. You will find strategies, videos, all types of materials on the projects we did at that university. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you. I am at your disposal to continue conversing with you. Thank you, Professor Jimenez Bautista, for coordinating this. Thank you so much for inviting me. And I send a big hug to all of you. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, profesor
Thank you
Francisco.
so much, Professor Francisco del Pozo, for your excellent, your magnificent presentation, and for using the time we had allocated to you. Next, Dr. Andrea Barrientos Soto, existing challenges for families and the schooling system. University of Granada. She has a BA, University of Illinois. She has a BA on psychology, and she's done Latin American studies and studies on women as well, social policies, and she's did this at Harvard University, and she teaches at the University of Granada, Spain. She teaches psychology there. She has written a book on alternative education and teachers training and education program. She's done a lot of consulting work with public institutions, universities, and she's also worked with various companies, especially at the Complutense Science School in Puerto Rico. You have the floor, Professor Andrea Barrientos. Thank you. Can you hear me? Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, depending on where you are located right now. Thank you for this kind invitation. What a pleasure sharing this information with all of you, rather, in this fourth conference on peace building from a gender perspective. Thank you so much. My comments are comprised of three parts: the school family relationship before and during the pandemic, family integration to mitigate what we are losing in this pandemic and recommendations for mitigation and integration in this new reality. Well, as has already been mentioned, well, the family are a social unit, an essential unit. This is an environment where people socialize and values are instilled in people so that the individuals may be part of society. So those are the values and socialization practices that are basic for human development in any context. So family structure is a social universe of high value and appreciation. What is the situation of the family in terms of teaching? What is the relationship of the family with schools? We've always seen a type of stress or tension, not intended, but it's always there, between expectations of the school participating in the family structure and the family participating in the school structure in terms of cooperation, collaboration, and participation in decision making. This, of course, is an expectation both structures have. On the other hand, schools are also looking at this type of access or relationship with the family and the parents especially. And we see how the schools have had true collaboration in the family structure and the decision-making process. So there is cross expectations and collaboration. Sometimes, however, this relationship has not been the best one in the world. This is multidimensional, as we well know. We found that basically only 10% of the parents went to meetings with teachers. However, they were also interviewed and questions were asked, confirming the value of their participation in the schools, but desires are not always part of actions. A lot has to be done in this respect. Many of us know the slogan of the school: the school teaches and the family educates. This is the slogan. So the school has two responsibilities that have to do with primary education and elementary teachings. And what about the economic situation of the parents and the family? That also has a lot to do. And a lot of those responsibilities have to do with the responsibility of the school, the relationship with the parents. We see, however, that in this pandemic, many families see how the family structure continues having an education role and informational role. Once more, the parents, the family is going back to that type of responsibility, educating and teaching. We cannot talk about families and schools in this relationship without talking about this pandemic of COVID-19 affecting the Latin American and Caribbean regions. You have some numbers here to give you the right perspective. Over than 170 million children are not going to school in the Latin American and Caribbean regions. We could be losing out on 25 million jobs, and the number of unemployed people could increase to 37.7, and 29 million could fall in the poverty line. So these are significant numbers in any education policy, and this policy has to be taking this into account because this is something that's greatly affecting families. Let me talk about Puerto Rico. This is my starting point, the perfect storm. I've done work in Puerto Rico, and let me tell you about the context and the situation before the pandemic in Puerto Rico. Well, it was basically a perfect storm, as I've said. The economy was very weak and growing child population, living under poverty, and the elderly population is also increasing with a lot of mental health and general health problems, low income, employment, underemployment, and also in this complex situation, we would have to add natural disasters, earthquakes, hurricanes, and lack of trust. That was another problem in Puerto Rico, lack of trust of citizens in the government. And this led to the fact that mm, people had to oust the governor of Puerto Rico. This has a special meaning for girls, boys, and youth in the families. And the fourth of the population over 65 years of age are going through a very critical situation, health situation, chronic health problems, and especially children in these families with low incomes. Well, they have to take care of someone in their family with a disability or chronic condition. There's a high percentage of families in Puerto Rico that are monoparental, and most of the kids live in poverty, and they live in monoparental households, and they have to participate in the caregiving activities, although they are children. And another important piece of data here that applies to all this context of connectivity and education is that 74% of children in these low-income households have access to internet. And in higher income families, it is 90% of children having internet access. This is according to the Development Institute, according to figures of this year, 2020. However, this is very important to remember. Challenges. What does this mean for schools, teachers, and the family itself in terms of teaching and the learning process? We have seen children interrupting their schooling, and we're talking about children who are now living at home because of the confinement with younger children, school children living with younger kids in their own family. So there are movement restrictions, and the family household is overcrowded. And this is, of course, very important. And there's lack or little access to technology and stable connectivity. And they are sharing electronic devices to be connected to have online education. And this is a problem because the family members have to compete over the electronic gadgets or equipment. And finally, we know this is always a major challenge in families. This has to do with incorporation of parents teaching the children now at home. And what about the knowledge the parents have to be teaching their own children? This, of course, implies their participation, but it also touches on their education and cultural levels, the levels of the parents, I mean. What do we see then on the school part and the teacher's part? Well, generally lack of knowledge of technology and platforms, and how much can teachers be part of this tele-education process and the implications of using them and teaching children through those tele processes. And this has to do with increasing the number of hours people are working now and the amount of people, and people have to be participating even more, but sometimes they cannot see the results of the learning process for children because the children are at home. So yes, this has to be very important. And generally, I think that many teachers that do not have the necessary support, they don't have a clear roadmap on what it is that they should be doing for teleeducation. So there are social economic implications for the family. I wanted to highlight this because I think they are a very important part of how we can understand the meaning of where we're at in terms of education in this pandemic for youth and children. First of all, we have to understand that the work has a function as a guardian and protector. That is, there are many children who meet their basic needs, including daily meals that are given to children in schools. And this is like an oasis to neutralize what is happening in the household. Schools become a sort of oasis for children, especially when there's family violence at home. And what happens is that here I quote, we have to look at the safeguarding, protecting education functions of schools for us to look at the objectives of this. I think this is very, very important. Another very important aspect of social economic aspects or families related to schools, this has to do with the exclusion barrier, which is technology and connectivity. The World Bank published a report on the digital poor segments of the population. And this is nothing new, but we educators are understanding many of these things that have to do with the digital poor populations and the power of digital means, and the broadband is not reaching even 50% of the population in the region. So we see an important need to increase interconnection in our populations. And the third social factor has to do with gender perspective issues and mobile technologies. Many women are lagging behind in terms of the use of technology or digital technology. Therefore, they cannot access money transfer methods. They have no medical information. They have no access to education or opportunities for employment. Before the pandemic, it was estimated that 300 million women throughout the world using internet we're not using mobile internet services. This constitutes a gap of 20% of the population. What can we propose vis-a-vis the situation to look at this complex conditions and situation? Well, we want to start looking at the family and its participation in education as something more important, because we know there is no school, no social entity in itself that may be able to respond to all the needs of our current situation, even before this pandemic. Therefore, we have to remember that the family and the school is just more than the sum of its parts. And what we are proposing is a new formula, a binomial situation, which is not just the school. It is when the school opens its doors for the parents once every 6 months, once a year, when the parents come and meet the teachers, and then they leave and they never see each other again. But really, we want to see how can we have a family school where we can join energies and efforts and thus be able to strengthen the level of resilience of boys and girls and youth. Just meeting once a year is not enough. We have to be connected through the media, through our own networks, and networks that may truly allow us to have practices that are useful and efficient to attend to family needs. And this requires, as I understand it, a new way of looking at things, a new gaze. And the families are not clients, they are not a product, but they have to participate in their children's education. For that, we have to reformulate this relationship, because we are now seeing a co-management systems between the family and the school. Now, what has to take place before we start this? We start facing up to these challenges of the family school. First, we have to mitigate those challenges. We have wasted a lot of time in terms of the forecasts. Now we have more serious forecasts to recover this new situation. We have to start looking and working with a more clear agenda with the participation of family and teachers. I think policies related to economic security, well, that's a priority. Any investment, social investment on the part of the government may contribute to reducing social risks and for resilient recovery, even financial protection. We are in electoral times, and we are also in times where it is crucial for us to see as educators who are we voting for, who are the people and the candidates that give the families economic security through their platforms. That's what it amounts to. Second, we have to recognize that families are experiencing changes, dramatic changes in their working methods. There are so many things that are coming through this pandemic, new conditions, new employment, new unemployment, underemployment as well. And this is something that we have to look at, and people are going through all this, and this means that the labor world is something we had never known before as we know it now. So when Rifkin talks about this in 1995, the end of employment, now we're facing another end of employment. This may have a direct impact on how the family relates to their children, boys and girls, in their household, and how the parents are closer to their children or they are far away from their children more than ever before. This has to do with the orientation they need for this to change. Now, another very important aspect of mitigation has to do with education for peace and measurements of that education, but in effect, how we can make services available to mediate in families that already have conflicts. And we have seen examples, for instance, in families and how family violence has increased as a consequence of this lockdown and the confinement they live in. And this is something that has to be changed, and this is something we have to attend to in a very urgent manner, aside from what we can do long-term to incorporate mitigation, mediation, and peace building also at the school, and this should be a mandatory process, and those services have to be made available in the school and the family environments to mitigate and prevent family violence, which is happening so much right now. Now, finally, through the mitigation process, we can talk about the role of nonprofit community organizations. They are extremely efficient. They're directly linked to geographic spaces and sectors in that where we can have measures for boys, girls, and adolescents, and for the entire family. Families needing those services, of course, because the university level has like a three-leg structure. First, we have the mercantile, the public capital, but those institutions also have social capital. That's the third sector. So it is extremely effective to see that per every dollar that's being invested in education, the state pay is $20 for the same service. Not only for the families, not only are they winning, but the government is also getting a good part of this victory. Now, let me say that we can now think of integration vis-a-vis family school challenges. Here we could highlight two elements that I think are essential and basic. The first one has to do with what Professor Del Pozo just mentioned, urgent need to introduce or strengthen social education from the school level. And this is a strength, this is a methodology, this is an orientation, guidance that can be given to professors, to educators, and to parents in the family, and also everyone participating in the teaching process, telling them which are the best measures and the most appropriate measures to incentivize social participation, especially in risk families and, and social protection. And for the future, how can we see our teachers? How can we better support them? How can we see professional information of teachers and their enhancement at the professional level? This should prioritize technological aptitudes. This has been a challenge, especially in this pandemic. We know that, but we cannot lose sight on the fact that education will not be effective if we don't attend to elements of protection and resilience and for our children and adolescents. We cannot just give them technology if this is not in the context basically of protection and rights of those children and adolescents. Now, this is a new reality with different implications for everyone. And I think here we could summarize it as follows. One, something evident through COVID-19 is that this pandemic is not only related to a public health emergency. This is attacking in a very hazardous way, in particular human rights of boys, girls, and adolescents with social exclusion. This is an attack against their own education. Lack of connectivity, lack of consistency, has meant important voids, and that it will be very difficult to fill those voids in the future. And one study recently showed that teachers had contacted students and their families, and some responded, others said they had more or less connectivity, but some of them never answered. They never answered the call of the school to be part of this new modality, using technology and having long distance courses or online classes. This is even 20% of students in schools. So this is significant exclusion of boys and girls in their own educational process. On the other hand, there are many who say this is a crisis of the capitalist system, a crisis of everything that's public. And in terms of everything that's public, especially regarding education, I think this is a concept we have to revisit. For common well-being, this is a co-responsibility of society, and as an entity, which is a complete entity, and this has to do with solidarity and common well-being, of course. And something we are seeing here, as mentioned before, is this delay, this backwardness, this lagging behind of children and adolescents in their education process. And this is, of course, a terrible thing happening. So this generational impact, as mentioned by the United Nations as well, this has to do with a global vision of maintaining objectives, SDGs, and sustainable development goals as the spearhead, but in terms of the most vulnerable, marginalized segments of our societies with a gender perspective. That's what numbers tell us, and this is part of the strategy to try to help and address this terrible situation so that we can look into this new reality and live in it. Let me conclude by sharing something said by Isabel Allende, the writer. I think it's simple, but what is this pandemic teaching us? It is teaching us priorities, and it is also showing reality to us, reality of inequality, how a few people have a yacht where they are going through this pandemic and others are going hungry. However, creators, artists, scientists, all young people, many women do not want to go back to the new, are looking now into the new normality. They are saying, what world do we want to live in? And this is happening in Puerto Rico, and we know what is happening there in Chile as well. A new constitution is being drafted in Chile. and this will have a gender perspective. So then this is the most important question right now, and this is a dream of a different world, and that's where we should be heading to. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you so much. Yes, Dr. Andrea Barrientos, thank you so much for your presentation. And now let us give the floor to Dr. Diego Becerril of the University of Granada in Spain. He will be talking about the family as a source of education. He has taught at the Political Science and Sociology School of the University of Granada, and he has been the director of different working groups, groups working on social issues at the University of Granada. And he's done research on youth, family, and social structure. He's done research on various projects at the education ministry, and he's been working at Harvard as a guest professor and also at the University of Havana. He has done so much work on this, especially in terms of legal education reforms and families breaking up through a divorce, for instance. And what a great honor. It is, he is truly an authority on family and education issues. You have the floor, Dr. Diego Becerril, please. Yes, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Good morning for you in America, and good afternoon for us in Europe. I want to thank the organizers for inviting me. Well, these are colleagues with so many similar professional activities and many other people from which I am learning so much. We are doing so many things and growing because of those activities, yes, and thank you for inviting me. I had prepared a presentation through various items that will coincide in our way of thinking, but not the context. This year I was thinking, for instance, when we celebrated the International Peace Day, September 21st, Forging Peace Together. That was the slogan. I always think of the family. This is my profession, of course. So this, I thought, has a lot to do with the family, with society at large. But I was thinking, well, families may be used to forge peace better. In 1981, when this Peace Day was installed, I say, wars are born in people's minds. That's where we should also implant peace principles in people's minds. So I think this allows us to look into culture, education issues. So in this 20 minutes that I have for my presentation, let me try to give you a practical vision. I will not go into theoretical issues. What dynamics do we have within the family that might be a source of peace, and more peace than ever generated before? And let me talk about the virtual thing. And let me talk about the couple in the family and horizontal and the couple vis-a-vis other parts of the family. And let us suggest this, and as we can say, for this debate, I will leave so many things open. I'm not closing all the issues that I'm going to be posing. And if I now go into the vertical situation, and this is very important. In spite of everything, well, what can we say? Although we see reductions in birth rates, many people do want to have children, but maybe they are delaying the moment in which they become parents. but still they want to have children. I think we would really have to work on something very important to create a climate and environment of peace. It has to do with quality education. That's very important. High quality education. This has to do with values. I am of the opinion that we have to have an important interaction between the school and the family. I would say this is indispensable, but I would also say many things the school should not be doing, that not formal content for the formation of values. This has to be part of the family activities and responsibilities. So we would have to recover this responsibility of the family. What happens with children? I think that they are, we are losing education styles where education styles are not being implemented. All this technology we now have available to us, which is being of great use because we can communicate thousands of kilometers of distance away. So this has to have an impact on the individual. And in terms of the family structure, I think sometimes communication is lost. Yet there are many people who say, yes, WhatsApp allows us to say so many things, but not one-on-one, not face-to-face communication. It doesn't allow us to have a discussion where people pose their arguments and allegations. And sometimes through the technology, we can make mistakes because we don't interpret some words right, because we don't know the direction of those words. So we do have to have special efforts right now to create education styles that will be truly education values, will be educating people on their values. And what about the rights people have, but what about obligations? And can we instill educations on our children? Everyone has to have a little of everything. And if they don't have a little of everything, well, obviously, we would have to pose a strategy where we can get a little of everything, because that's something we have to have. So there has been a lot of social uprisal in Spain, and there might be a basis to it. People are protesting, and they are right, but this becomes in the plundering and unrest, and they are plundering and going into stores of designers brands, and people say, why don't I have the right to have that dress or something like that? So I'm going to break this showcase and go into the store, of course, and get it for myself. Fortunately, this is not happening so much, but I think it's paradoxical to look at the end of this. Paradoxical in terms of showing as there are people demanding those rights. So a second thing, and I'm not going into detail, this has to do with something that was already said. This is something that we should be implementing in this capacity of peace building dialogue. It has to do with immediacy of things. With these conditions we have generated, or at least we're heading to immediacy, is something that we cannot refute. I mean, or rebuke. We have to say, well, I want to be communicating with that person. I want it and I want it now. I want to enjoy it and I will pay for it later. I want to talk to this person, but I want to talk to this person now. So if I want to buy something, I was anxious about getting that something, and I will pay it whenever I can later on. In the past, things were different. But now what happens is that if I want something, I desire that now, immediately. Even though I can pay mortgage for 30 years or 40 years, even though I will pay for it dearly in the past, I want it now, no matter how much it costs. This has very important complications, because in the world of the couple at home, for instance, is not only that, but there are many important factors. The impact on a couple, a man and a woman, or a couple. Many times social abuse. Does it have to do with this idea? I want something and I have to have it now. I like that girl and I will want her immediately. I'm not courting her. I'm not going to go steady with her. I'm not going to be her boyfriend. I want her now. And why can I have the right to take her right now? So educating children, not only children, but sometimes I think we have the right ground for this to increase in the future. So first of all, I would mention this relationship that I think will be more related to gender issues and family relations in the future. I think we have to educate. It is difficult sometimes. I understand that we have to have certain discipline. So, no one wants limits in their lives, but I think this is something we have to do now and in the future. This may be very important. If not, we are going to see that one of the basic problems is the parent-children violence, or the children being violent with their parents. This is something we're now seeing because they don't have a way to relate to their parents, so they become violent with their own parents. And these are not children that we can classify as such, saying, well, they have addictions, that's why they're violent against their parents. This is not the case. We cannot classify them that way, but this is happening. And this is also in terms of sex equality. There are boys and girls. Yes, girls are becoming increasingly violent. And I think this has been a certain assimilation of male, masculine models on the part of girls. So the girls are saying, well, instead of holding a dialogue as they used to be able to hold a dialogue in the past, the girls are now using more violence. Now, my first item has to do with support and needs of working with education styles, with the more gender equality and more peaceful means to solve conflict, avoiding, of course, the violence of children against their parents. The second thing has to do with descendants and ascendants. We have seen now, especially in European countries and also in Latin America, that we are sentencing the residence part of all this. We've discovered this system is inconvenient. Not long ago, some 20, 30 years ago, the elderly were always in their children's home, especially in their daughter's home. They took care of their parents. And it was usually a woman. The senior citizen was usually the woman because they live longer than their husbands. So the daughter was taking care of their mother, but whenever the mother needed to be taken care of, they realize they have to take care of their own mother. So all this pandemic should make us reflect on models we've created. It's not like many people thought. People interviewed said, well, I really don't want to take my parents to a home. But if I do, I know they will have very good healthcare systems and they will be protected. Well, this pandemic is showing us that this is not so clear. Many of the elderly people have died in homes for the elderly. However, we should be creating a peace culture, especially for senior citizens. In many cases, these are women because their husbands have already passed away. And sometimes we are not remembering that this is not just for the couple, but for the elderly, generally women. I haven't said this, but the violence of children against parents, it's the mothers suffering it more. The mothers are ill-treated by their children more than the fathers. And almost all violence problems are suffered by women, not only in terms of violence from their partner, but also from the children. There's a lot of violence in the family, violence against women, not strictly coming from their partner. So it's very important to remember this. It's very important to work with this situation and to work on this in the family structure. We should be taking care of children, but to contribute with experiences, with values. It is true that we cannot ask them how the iPad works or how to download an application, but we have set aside so many things, and the elderly are physically set apart. What about their presence? How can we integrate senior citizens in our family life? This would be making a great contribution, I think. So better education styles for children to recover the way the elderly are being treated. So up and down of this scale, I have to place the partner. A family is comprised of a partner. Usually that's the way it is. We do have other experiences and structures, of course, but it's usually a partner, a couple that is. So peace building work for equality is very important. So much needs to be done. I don't think there's a future without this. I think this is the path we have to follow. I don't think there's any other path. It's important for us to work on this. They used to have a parents' school. This should perhaps be mandatory. I cannot inherit from my parents education teaching me on how to educate my own children. I am facing new challenges, new technologies. I have various behaviors. I have a context which is absolutely different. So how can I do? Why am I learning through school? People are asking. Well, we are learning things we didn't know. We are discovering mechanisms to better guide our children in new problems we all face. It's not that we are more ignorant than previous generations, but there are such fast social changes, and sometimes we don't have the necessary tools. So what would I do with a couple at home? I think there's one thing that's so necessary: communication. I think communication is lacking. We are not speaking with each other in the couple. We were talking about how do you manage money issues? Well, money is a source of power. How do you manage money in the family structure? Maybe the woman does not work outside the home. A lot of the couples never talk about money. That's what we found. They were going steady, they got married, they had children, but they almost never talk about money distribution. Is it a common fund, or does each one have a bank account? So this is an important vital issue, but they don't talk about it. And it seems that when you talk about communication, it's a negative thing. Communication is associated to problems in the couple or in the family. In school, when the teacher tells you, I have to talk to you, or when they tell the parents, come over and talk to us, will you immediately think, what is the problem? What did I do? What did my child do? If not, you are usually never called to tutoring meetings. Usually the parents think, if I'm not being called by the school, my child is doing okay, but you never think of things that can be improved. Communication only takes place if the teacher calls the parents. And in the couple, the same thing is happening. If your spouse tells you we have to talk, the other part will start asking what is happening, something wrong. Did I say something wrong? Because meaning we have to talk means we have a problem. If there was frequent communication, maybe we wouldn't have to make an appointment to talk. We could just sit down during dinner, for instance, but a lot of this communication has been lost because both work and there's no moment where everyone can get together because people are not doing the same thing all the time. Some are watching television, others are speaking to their friends on their phone. So it's difficult to have communication. And if there's no communication, there is no dialogue. Dialogue is fundamental for us to be able to have non-conflicts and to have peace, not only peace and non-conflicts, but also to have an environment in which you feel happy. And this has gender perspectives, but let me go back to some other things that are not frequently analyzed. I have seen places where they talk about positive masculinity. There are some areas in which the woman predominates. We have to be aware of that domination, and perhaps that should be giving way to another type of dynamic. And how is the woman dominant? It's always been the other way around. She is always dominated on, not the dominant element of a relationship or in the decision-making process. There are some in which the woman makes the decisions. Some decisions are made jointly, but whenever you have to decide, the man or the woman, it's usually the woman that makes the decisions. So this is an important sphere we should be looking at. And the extended family, well, frequently the extended family relations, well, they're very close relations, provided this is the women's family, but it's more complicated if it's the men's family. This is an issue that we should be working on. A lot of inequality there. Now, the couple, I was talking about the children. I was also talking about the elderly in the family, but what about the couple? But now let me go on to mention another one of the four issues, the horizontal sphere, the siblings, brothers and sisters. I think they do important work in society of pacification, peace work. I will always remember, maybe you haven't read it, but you have seen the Tolstoy, Anna Karenina, starting when she has to solve a problem of the brother. He is unfaithful, and the wife discovers he's not being faithful. So she calls Anna Karenina, who talks to the wife, and she solves the problem of infidelity, because the husband and a woman, what if he hadn't, no, rather not a woman and not a wife, a sister, if not, they never would have had enough resources or family networks to solve the problem. I mentioned this because if we don't have many children, I mean, if we don't have many children in terms of the birth rate, I mean, we're also creating families with not many siblings. So the children will be growing up as single children, children growing up alone. So there's lack of capacity with empathy because they don't have anyone to be empathetic with. They don't have any siblings they can share opinions with or share things with. They don't have to pay attention to anyone else. So we're creating generations and families, sometimes with no children. But there's just one child, well, the horizon is completely different because parents want to give this one child everything. And Spain, worldwide, is the country where people have children when they're older. And I think this is something that's not discussed, but it does need analysis. Families with just one child, what impact does it have on the education structure? There are many Latin American countries where this does not happen. Families have a lot of children. But in Spain right now, other European countries, the birth rate is falling. So they have families here in Europe with just one child. And let me also say something on this. We reaching a society where we are paying more attention to material things and to a very high living standard with a lot of resources. But what about happiness? Happiness is important, of course. If you're happy with a person irradiating peace, tranquility, and happiness, that's great. But what if a person is generating conflicts and therefore this creates a violent relationship? Let me go on to the last comment. Surveys, polls, asking people how many children do you want to have? People would say 4 children, 3 children. There was a number of respondents. Answers. Generally, they had more than children than they said. When a woman thought she was not able to get pregnant, all of a sudden she would have a last child. But this was not planned. So they had families of 4, 6 children. A few years ago, however, things are changing. Things started changing. People would want to have more children, but they have less children. So people say, I want to have at least 2 children, but I have no children or just 1. I'm saying this because in the societies, perhaps we all aspire to well-being societies that live in peace, where our desires are materialized. Well, what are the desires of having children? Wanting the number of children. This is not a possible thing anymore. Most people want to have more children, but they don't. Perhaps this has to do with developed societies, but I'm thinking this is something we should be working on. To conclude, I set many principles for my presentation: relationship with children, relationship with the elderly, relationship with the couple with their family networks. We have to work on this. This doesn't come alone. And of course, years come alone and our gray hair just starts appearing. But these relations do not come on their own. We have to create them. We have to make them happen. And I think we have to objectivize this, and we have to start working on values and peace culture. This is basic, I think. This should be mandatory, I believe. And we haven't been able to avoid conflict, which is not easily to avoid. This is a natural process because we all have our different purposes in life, but then we have to have mediation, negotiations. That's what we have to have, and this is something we have to teach. Skills for problem solving. You cannot settle a problem just hitting someone with a club or something, no. There are many people who do that. They attack the other person. However, one thing is fearing others. Yes, you're walking in the street very late at night, everything is very dark, no one is there to help you. You're afraid. But what all of a sudden you meet someone out in the street, you're afraid because everything is dark and you don't know this person. However, if we know each other better, there will be less fear because we're communicating better, the couple communicates better, the children, the neighbors are communicating better. So this fear level declines and we are not so afraid because we can understand the other one better. We are generating a relationship. We are not hitting people to solve any type of controversy or dispute. Yes, so then where does fear go? Where are we feeling this fear, especially in things we ignore or very big spaces? We fear darkness, for instance, and when people were doing this, we would say, well, who is playing? Who knows who is going to die? Especially when people used to live so much out in the forest. People were afraid of the dark forest. But the second issue, It's not only the relationship, but sometimes people don't have the means, the techniques. People do not know how to mediate that conflict. This is done through mediation. How can I solve this conflict? What is the mediation technique that I can use for peaceful solution of my problem? I think on one hand, we have to work on those conflicts to be the least number possible. But if the conflict arises, we have to have the method, the technique, the skills. Many people don't have that. They have never learned them to face the conflict. And I think the family sphere would be working so much better if we understand this. I think that's the key for our own controls. So please have better communication in your family and practice mediation, negotiating skills better to solve conflict. And with this, I conclude. Yes, I think I have used all the time I had. Thank you so much. Thank you, Professor Diego Becerril. We're waiting for questions. When one talks about the family, the anthropological sphere where I work, we find 9 types of families. Some manuals say 15 different types of families, really. So we've been working so much on parental anthropology, or a family is someone living under the same roof for a year. That's the family. That's a good definition. The family as an institution believes it has a future. How to start with the same order that we had in our presentations, Maria Elvira and then the others. Is the family at all useful in this type of society we live in, or has its usefulness worn out? Yes, in effect, Dr. Francisco, I believe in the family. I am an advocate for the family structure, for the creation of this family and the structure of the family. In effect, we can say that in Latin America and Ecuador, we believe in families still. And those of us working in the academy doing research, we are betting on working in that family space. It is true there are problems, and in a very interesting manner, each one of the speakers have mentioned this. We've been talking about working conditions. It seems that there's nothing else we can do in the family structure, but I really saying that there's so much work to still be done in the family. There are many families who are being created just now, many families who could be going through another stage in which they don't have children, the empty nest phenomenon. But we could strengthen this from early stages, because those children, those adolescents are part of a family, and we would expect for them to continue being a formal part. So the first years of anyone's lives are fundamental to teach people to believe in the family structure, to establish working strategies, as Professor Diego said, for us not to be having to make an appointment to talk to someone in our family, to our children, to our spouse. And for this to be ongoing communication, this is the everyday activity of the family. That's what I mean. So I do support and invite those who are working on those issues to create those spaces of reflection, such as this one, because they can guide us, they can guide researchers to put this in their daily practice. I'm talking about strategies and different elements, and things that have had good results for others. And especially for those people who are interested, they can also learn from these initiatives to protect this important cell of society, the family structure. Yes, please, Francisco del Pozo, please. A few words to conclude our panel. I want to thank our colleagues and the coordinator, of course, Yes, I want to thank everyone. I don't want to forget this, but I do want to emphasize three elements. First, the family, it's like a management role. That's what it has. They can manage things. We have to work from just a vertical position. A dysfunctional structure has to become a facilitating structure. And this is done with life histories, life experiences, and according to research of Professor Zulema, this goes from fear to love, love to fear. And it also goes through relationships. If we can accompany this, and this is my last idea, through co-responsibility at the institutional level, from community issues, from the participation of schools and public entities and the social state structure in our countries. Thus, we can accompany this, and this is highly desired. We can manage this accompaniment, the support, so that we can have an impact and so that we can be agents for peace-building measures and with those family, not on the family, but with the family. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Francisco. Now, yes, Andrea, please, Andrea Barrientos. Hello, everyone. Yes. I think this is quite an interesting question in terms of the family existence. I think we have to go back to basics. That is the definition. If we limit ourselves to defining what a family is, we see many people are limiting themselves just to that definition. But if we can accept multiple types of formations and types of families that exist, I think we would have a more of an agent managing function. This unit should be defined as the family. So it is a family, although they're not united by their bloodline or anything, even if it's not an extended family. In Chile, for instance, we have a saying, adults who are the friends of your parents, you call them aunt or uncle, even though there's no family relationship, but they are your aunt or your uncle because they are very close to your own parents. They're very good friends. This happens in what we mentioned as transnational families. They are going to another country, they are migrating, and they speak another language. And then they meet people from the same town, they look for each other, and they create communities, even though they do not live in the same country or in the same city. And these are exile families, that's what we call them. So I think the definition of family has to be more flexible. And if this is the case, I think we have to defend the family structure. That implies public policies favoring family structures, and also family leave for both father and mother, and that type of flexibility, that type of public policies to strengthen the ties, such important relations. The other thing is that no one is born knowing how to be a parent, a father or a mother. So families are very fragile today. Therefore, we need this type of orientation of support. The parents' schools to go back to basics, so those responsible adults may know how to truly do as much as they can to lead those small lives in their hands. Imagine if we were to say that since children go to school when they're 6 or 7 years of age, then if they knew how to mediate in conflict, how not to fight over toys, how not to fight over who stands where in the line waiting for something. So this has to do with education for peace. But just imagine for a minute that if children, when they went to school, if they already had this information, what would this mean for the work of teachers in schools, for children that would already know how to mediate, children going to a first grade, if they knew all these things? This is nothing coming from nothing. I mean, we have to invest on children. We have to invest educating children, defending the family. We have to be involved in teachers and rather in children's education from the beginning. Well, thank you. And to start closing, yes, Diego, thank you so much. I agree with everything everyone has said. Family crisis. Well, when I teach family sociology, I talk about family crisis. This always comes up. But as the moderator was saying, yes, fear, will it ever disappear? I don't think so. That's very clear. Economically, for the states, they cannot always, well, can we have a country without a family? I don't think so. So we have to have the family structure at the personal ethics level. If we didn't have families, this would be creating a lot of problems. We cannot see a future without a family structure. This will never be. Robotics cannot take over the family structure. And we have a film, the Swedish Theory of Love, where the elderly die alone with a lot of resources, but they die alone. No, 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 this is not to happen. We need solidarity with family structure. The truth, however, and someone mentioned limitations. There's a clear problem of definition. What is a family? I love this when we talk about this. I love it when we say, well, who is this for? And you realize that with years, yes, what is the family for people who live alone? So we have the family construct. If everything is the family, nothing is the family. Let me tell you about Spain. The Women's Institute in Spain has gone through, it's called the Institute of Women in plural, because not just one woman, it was the women's, now it's the Women's Institute. And there is a proposal that the DNA will be changing if someone feels, he or she feels to another gender, another, everything is liquid now. So the family structure, we have to set new limits. And I can say that the family is anyone that I feel affection for. My dog and I are my family. We are a family. I have a dog, I have a pet at home, and I feel great affection for my pet. So the pet is my family. And this is quite an ambiguous thing, but this is something to be understood. Let me conclude. I think the family structure will continue, will prevail, but families, not only one family. I like this pluralistic and very diverse way of seeing things, but I think this may have an impact on the family as institution. Our economists are talking about the economies. We can talk about the US economy, the Cuban economy, but the institution just talks about one economy. We have to defend the family as an institution. This doesn't mean we cannot talk about families in a great diversity and plurality. Yes, very good. Thank you, everyone. I want to thank everyone for your excellent presentations. Jorge, I think we've covered our time, and so later on today, we shall continue with this meeting. Yes, yes, panel number 6. Thank you so much, all of you, for this conversatory. So interesting, all the approaches, all the presentations, all your comments. We thank you so much, everyone. Well, thank you so much for this coordination. We know it was fundamental for our work. We say goodbye to this panel. Thanking you. We shall see you Mexico time, 1 p.m. with panel 6, experiences and reflections on peace building in academic and community contexts, organized by the Gender Inclusion Program and other institutions. Thank you. We shall see you at 1 p.m. Mexico time. Thank you once more. Thank you. Yes, hugs, and I want to thank everyone. Thank you. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you. Goodbye. Thank you.